Have you ever wondered if the person meant to change your life might arrive disguised as someone you barely notice? Jonathan Hale stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the autumn leaves spiral down toward the streets of Greenwich, Connecticut, 40 floors below. The October sunset painted the Long Island Sound in shades of amber and rose, but he saw none of it. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in the endless loop of worry that had become his constant companion since the accident 3 years ago. His phone buzzed. Another resignation letter, this time from Mrs. Patterson, the 5th caregiver to leave in 18 months. The message was polite but firm. She cited emotional exhaustion, the same phrase they all used eventually. Jonathan set the phone face down on his mahogany desk and pressed his fingers against his temples. Lucas deserved better. His 12-year-old son deserved consistency, patience, and genuine care. Instead, he got a revolving door of strangers who treated him like a task to be managed rather than a child to be loved. Jonathan had tried everything money could buy: the best physical therapists, occupational specialists, counselors who charged $500 an hour to ask Lucas how he was feeling. None of it had brought back the light in his son's eyes. The accident played in Jonathan's memory like a film he couldn't stop rewatching. 3 years ago, on a bright September afternoon, his wife Catherine had been driving Lucas home from soccer practice. A delivery truck driver, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, had run a red light at 40 miles per hour. Catherine died on impact. Lucas survived, but the damage to his spine left him paralyzed from the waist down. Jonathan had been in a board meeting when he received the call. He remembered the exact moment. The fluorescent lights humming overhead, the confused faces of his executives as he dropped his phone and ran from the room without a word. By the time he reached the hospital, Catherine was already gone. Lucas was in surgery, his small body fighting for survival, while Jonathan paced the waiting room, bargaining with a God he wasn't sure he believed in. Lucas survived. The doctors called it a miracle, but the boy who woke up 3 weeks later wasn't the same child who had scored 2 goals that afternoon and begged his mother to stop for ice cream on the way home. That Lucas had been confident, athletic, full of boundless energy and easy laughter. The new Lucas was quiet, withdrawn, prone to fits of anger that dissolved into tears. He refused to talk about his mother. He refused to talk about much of anything. Jonathan threw himself into providing everything Lucas might need. He converted the entire first floor of their sprawling colonial mansion into an accessible suite. He hired the best specialists money could buy. He installed ramps, widened doorways, purchased the most advanced wheelchair on the market. He did everything except the one thing Lucas actually needed, which was his father's presence. Because the truth Jonathan couldn't admit, even to himself, was that he didn't know how to be present. Work had always been his refuge, the one arena where he felt competent and in control. Catherine had been the heart of their family, the one who knew how to comfort Lucas after a nightmare, how to turn a rainy Saturday into an adventure, how to make their house feel like a home. Without her, Jonathan was lost. So he worked longer hours, justified his absence by telling himself he was providing for Lucas's future, and hired strangers to do the job he should have been doing himself. The cameras had been his compromise with guilt. If he couldn't be there in person, at least he could watch, could ensure that no one was mistreating his son when he wasn't looking. He had discovered the need for them the hard way. 8 months after the accident, he had come home early to find Lucas's first nurse on her phone, ignoring his son's repeated requests for help reaching a book that had fallen from his lap. Jonathan had fired her on the spot, but the damage was done. He no longer trusted anyone with Lucas's care, so he installed cameras, tiny and sophisticated, hidden in smoke detectors, picture frames, decorative objects. They covered every room Lucas might occupy, feeding directly to a secure server that Jonathan could access from his phone or office computer. He told himself it was protection, vigilance, the responsible thing to do. He didn't examine too closely the fact that watching the feeds had become a form of torture, a way of witnessing his son's daily struggles without being present to help. His assistant knocked on the door, Jonathan turned from the window. Mr. Hale, the agency sent over a new candidate for the caregiver position. She's waiting in the conference room. Jonathan sighed. What's her name? Elena Vasquez. She's been with the agency for 3 years. Good references, though nothing exceptional. She specifically requested to interview for this position. That last detail caught Jonathan's attention. Usually, applicants were assigned by the agency based on availability. Send her in. The woman who entered his office a few minutes later was not what Jonathan expected. She was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that met his gaze directly without flinching. She wore a plain navy dress, sensible shoes, and no jewelry except for a thin silver chain around her neck. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance, nothing that suggested she was different from the dozens of caregivers who had come before her. Mr. Hale. Her voice was calm, neither deferential nor challenging. Thank you for seeing me. Please, sit. Jonathan gestured to the chair across from his desk. The agency tells me you requested this position specifically. May I ask why? Elena settled into the chair with a grace that seemed at odds with her modest presentation. I read about your son's case in the newspaper after the accident. I've been waiting for an opportunity to work with him. You've been waiting 3 years? Sometimes the right moment takes time to arrive. Jonathan studied her, uncertain what to make of this response. You understand this is a live-in position? You would be responsible for Lucas's daily care, including helping him with physical therapy exercises, managing his medication schedule, and assisting with his homeschool curriculum. I understand. The previous 5 caregivers have all resigned within a year. Some lasted only months. It's a demanding position. I don't doubt it. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, frustrated by her unflappable calm. Don't you want to know about the salary, the benefits, the time off? Those things matter, Elena acknowledged. But they're not why I'm here. I have only one question, Mr. Hale. What's that? Does Lucas like music? Jonathan blinked. Of all the questions he had anticipated, this wasn't among them. Music? I'm not sure. He used to play piano before. Catherine, my wife, she taught him. But he hasn't touched the instrument since the accident. Something flickered in Elena's eyes, an emotion Jonathan couldn't quite identify. Thank you. That's what I needed to know. The interview lasted another 20 minutes, covering the practical details of the position, but Jonathan's mind kept returning to that single question. When Elena left, promising to send over her references, he found himself uncertain whether to hire her or dismiss her as eccentric. That night, he reviewed her file more carefully. Elena Vasquez, 34 years old, born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, moved to Connecticut at age 12. Nursing degree from the University of Hartford, specialized training in pediatric care and physical rehabilitation. 3 years with the Westbrook Care Agency, excellent evaluations, no complaints. Nothing exceptional, as his assistant had said. But something nagged at Jonathan. He called the agency the next morning and asked for more details about her previous positions. Ms. Vasquez tends to request specific assignments, the agency coordinator told him. She's very selective about which families she works with. When she does take a position, she's extraordinary, but she's turned down several high-paying opportunities over the years. We've never quite understood her criteria. What happened to her last client? There was a pause on the line. He was a young man, 19 years old, recovering from a traumatic brain injury after a motorcycle accident. Elena worked with him for 2 years. He made remarkable progress under her care. And then he was ready to live independently. Elena helped him transition to his own apartment, set up a support system, and left. She left voluntarily. She always does, Mr. Hale. Elena doesn't stay forever. She stays until she's no longer needed. Jonathan hired her the next day. Elena arrived at the mansion on a gray November morning, carrying a single suitcase and a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. Jonathan met her at the door, awkward in his own home, uncertain how to behave around someone who would be living under his roof but wasn't family. "I'll show you to your room," he said. "It's in the east wing near Lucas's suite. You'll have your own bathroom and a small sitting area." "That's very generous." Elena looked around the grand foyer, taking in the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the crystal chandelier that cast rainbow fragments across the walls. If she was impressed, she didn't show it. "Where is Lucas?" "In the library. He has his homeschool lessons in the mornings." Jonathan hesitated. "I should warn you. He's not very welcoming to new staff. He's been through a lot of transitions." Children protect themselves in whatever ways they can. Elena set down her suitcase. "May I meet him now, before I settle in?" Jonathan led her through the house to the library, a warm room lined with books and overlooking the back garden. Lucas sat in his wheelchair by the window, a tablet propped on his lap, earbuds in, deliberately ignoring them as they entered. "Lucas." Jonathan touched his son's shoulder. "This is Elena. She's going to be helping take care of you." Lucas didn't remove his earbuds. He glanced at Elena with the practiced indifference of a child who had learned not to form attachments to temporary people, then returned his gaze to the window. Elena didn't seem offended. She simply said, "It's nice to meet you, Lucas. I'll be around when you're ready to talk." She turned and left the room without another word. Jonathan stared after her, then at his son, uncertain whether to apologize for Lucas's rudeness or Elena's abrupt departure. In the end, he did neither. He simply followed Elena out, leaving Lucas alone with his music and his thoughts. The first week passed uneventfully. Elena kept the household running smoothly, preparing meals, organizing Lucas's medication and therapy schedule, maintaining the house with quiet efficiency. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, never seemed to expect anything beyond the basic requirements of her position. What Jonathan noticed, when he bothered to notice, was how little she pushed. The previous caregivers had all tried to engage Lucas immediately, showering him with forced cheerfulness and manufactured enthusiasm that only made him retreat further into himself. Elena did none of that. She simply existed in Lucas's orbit, moving through the house like a calm presence, neither demanding his attention nor ignoring him entirely. Jonathan watched through his cameras, curiosity gradually replacing suspicion. He saw Elena pause outside Lucas's door each morning, listening for movement before knocking. He saw her place his breakfast tray at the exact spot on his desk where he could reach it easily, without making a production of her thoughtfulness. He saw her adjust the library blinds to reduce glare on his tablet screen, never mentioning it, never seeking credit. Small things. Invisible things. The kind of things that added up to someone paying attention. On the 8th day, Jonathan came home early from work, exhausted from a contentious board meeting, and retreated to his study to review the security feeds. He expected nothing. Perhaps that was why what he saw unsettled him so deeply. The library camera showed Elena sitting on the floor beside Lucas's wheelchair, not speaking, not doing therapy, not even touching him. She was simply there, her breathing slow and measured, her eyes closed, her palms resting flat on the hardwood floor. Lucas was watching her with an expression Jonathan hadn't seen on his son's face in years. Curiosity, uncertainty, the tentative interest of someone who had learned to expect disappointment, but couldn't quite suppress hope. After a long moment, Elena whispered something Jonathan couldn't hear clearly. Lucas's shoulders, usually rigid with tension, slowly dropped. Elena began tapping softly on the floor, a rhythm so gentle it barely registered on the audio feed. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out 2 wooden spoons, extending them toward Lucas. The boy hesitated, Jonathan leaned closer to the screen, holding his breath. Lucas took the spoons. He held them awkwardly, unsure what to do. Elena smiled, not the practiced smile of an employee performing pleasantness, but something raw and real and encouraging. She tapped her rhythm again and waited. Lucas tapped back. The sound was clumsy, uncertain. Elena nodded and tapped again, a slightly different pattern. Lucas tried to match it. Failed. Tried again. Closer this time. A rhythm formed between them, imperfect and halting, like a conversation in a language they were both learning. Elena's smile widened. Lucas's lips twitched, the ghost of an expression Jonathan had almost forgotten existed. And then Lucas laughed. The sound hit Jonathan like a physical blow. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard his son laugh freely, without bitterness or irony, without the sharp edge of pain that had colored every moment since the accident. This laugh was pure, surprised, delighted by its own existence. Jonathan's eyes blurred. He wiped them roughly with the back of his hand, embarrassed even alone in his study, and continued watching. The tapping game lasted another 10 minutes. When it ended, Elena collected the spoons and stood, stretching her back. Lucas looked up at her with an expression of naked vulnerability that made Jonathan's chest ache. "Same time tomorrow?" Lucas asked. His voice was small, uncertain, the voice of a child asking for something he expected to be denied. Elena's answer was simple. "Same time tomorrow." Jonathan watched her leave the library, then watched Lucas sit alone for several minutes, turning one of the wooden spoons over in his hands, studying it like it contained some secret he was trying to decode. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He lay in his empty king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about rhythms and spoons and laughter. He thought about Catherine, who had known instinctively how to reach their son, how to make him feel seen and valued and loved. He thought about his own failures, the walls he had built between himself and Lucas, the work he had used to justify his absence. And he thought about Elena Vasquez, who asked about music during a job interview and sat on the floor making rhythms with a child she had known for barely a week. Who was she? The question wouldn't leave him alone. Over the following days, Jonathan found himself returning to the camera feeds with increasing frequency. He told himself it was still about protection, about ensuring Lucas was receiving proper care. But he knew that wasn't entirely true. He was watching Elena now, trying to understand her, trying to decode the quiet magic she seemed to work on his household. He saw her read to Lucas in the evenings, not from children's books, but from adventure novels, pausing to ask his opinion on the hero's choices. "What would you do?" she would ask. "If you were in his position, what would you choose?" And Lucas, who rarely offered opinions to anyone, would consider the question seriously and respond. He saw her carry Lucas through his physical therapy exercises long after the licensed therapist had left for the day, turning each painful movement into a game. "That's 5, she would say when he completed a leg lift. "Yesterday was 4, tomorrow, maybe 6. No rush. We're just counting." He saw her adjust Lucas's blanket at night with painstaking care, smoothing the fabric without waking him, standing for a moment in his doorway before retreating to her own room. And he heard her speak to Lucas as if he were a partner in conversation, rather than a burden to manage. "You don't have to be brave all the time," she said one evening, when Lucas was struggling through a particularly difficult stretch. "You can be tired, you can be frustrated, you can be angry. I'll stay." Jonathan felt a tightening in his chest he couldn't name. Then came the moment that shattered his remaining assumptions. It was late, nearly midnight, and Jonathan had just returned from a client dinner in Manhattan. He should have been exhausted. Instead, he was restless, his mind churning with numbers and negotiations that suddenly seemed meaningless. He poured himself a whiskey and opened his laptop to check the camera feeds, a habit he could no longer pretend was about security. The living room camera showed Lucas alone in his wheelchair, his face twisted with an emotion Jonathan recognized all too well. Frustration, grief, the particular anguish of a body that refused to cooperate with the mind it contained. "I hate this chair," Lucas sobbed, his fists clenched against the armrests. "I hate being stuck. I hate being broken." Jonathan's instinct was to rush downstairs, but something held him in place, some intuition that his presence would only make things worse. He watched as Elena appeared in the frame, alerted by the sound of Lucas's distress. She didn't rush to him. She walked calmly across the room and knelt in front of his wheelchair, bringing her face level with his. She didn't speak. She just waited. "Everyone keeps telling me it'll get better," Lucas choked out. "But it won't. It's been 3 years. I'm never going to walk again. I'm never going to run or play soccer or do any of the things I used to do. I'm going to be stuck in this chair forever." Elena still didn't speak. She reached out and took Lucas's hands in hers, holding them gently, without pressure. "I know," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, but clear on the audio feed. "I know it won't get better the way they mean. Your legs won't start working tomorrow. You won't wake up cured. That's the truth, and people who tell you otherwise aren't helping you." Lucas stared at her, shocked by her bluntness. Jonathan was shocked too. Every therapist, every counselor, every well-meaning adult had insisted on hope, on possibility, on the chance that medical advances might someday restore Lucas's mobility. No one had ever simply acknowledged the reality of his situation. "But," Elena continued, "different doesn't mean gone. You're not broken, Lucas. You're changed. And changed things can still be whole." She guided Lucas's hands to her own knees and said, "Tell me what you miss." Lucas hesitated, then whispered, "Running. I miss running." Elena nodded. She began to move slowly, shifting her weight from foot to foot, a minimal walking-in-place motion that Lucas could feel through his hands on her knees. "This is movement," she said. "Feel it. The weight shifting, the muscles engaging, the rhythm of one side and then the other. It's different from running, but it's the same family of sensation." Lucas's breathing slowed. His eyes, which had been wild with pain, gradually focused. "Your body remembers," Elena said. 3 years isn't enough to forget 12 years of running and jumping and climbing. The memories are still there, stored in your muscles, your nerves, the way you think about space and movement. We can't bring back exactly what you lost, but we can remind your body what it knows. We can build new ways to feel strong and capable and free. How? Together. Slowly. Without any promises except that I'll be here while we figure it out. Lucas was crying, but the tears had changed quality. The desperate sobs had softened into something quieter, something that looked almost like relief. "Why do you care?" he asked. "You're just another person my dad hired. You'll leave like everyone else." Elena didn't flinch from the accusation. "Maybe I will leave someday, but not like you think. Not because this is too hard or because I don't care. I'll leave when you don't need me anymore. What if I always need someone?" "Then you'll find them. People who love you, people you choose, people who stay because they want to, not because they're paid. My job is to help you believe that's possible." Jonathan closed his laptop. He couldn't watch anymore. His hands were shaking, and his whiskey sat untouched on the desk, ice melting into amber liquid he no longer wanted. He had hired dozens of people to care for Lucas. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the best specialists money could buy. He had installed cameras and monitored feeds and convinced himself that vigilance was the same as love. But none of it had given Lucas what Elena offered in that single midnight conversation. Truth, presence, the willingness to meet him exactly where he was, without false promises or manufactured hope. Jonathan thought about his own grief, buried so deep he had almost convinced himself it no longer existed. He thought about Catherine, whose death he had never properly mourned, whose absence he had tried to fill with work and money, and the illusion of control. He thought about the walls between himself and his son, walls he had built one brick at a time, each absence a stone, each missed moment another layer of mortar. And he thought about Elena Vasquez, who sat on floors making rhythms and spoke truths that no one else had the courage to voice. The next morning, Jonathan asked Elena to meet him in his study. She came still wearing her cardigan and comfortable shoes, her hair slightly mussed from helping Lucas with his morning routine. She looked at Jonathan's desk, at the closed laptop, at his carefully neutral expression, and seemed to understand immediately that something had changed. "You've been watching," she said. It wasn't a question. Jonathan nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "The cameras. I installed them after Lucas's accident. I watch them sometimes." He paused. "I watched last night." He expected anger, or at least indignation. The violation of privacy, the breach of trust. Instead, Elena simply sat down in the chair across from his desk and waited for him to continue. "What you said to him," Jonathan managed, "about being changed but not broken, about the memories stored in his body. Where did you learn that?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Jonathan had ever heard it. "My brother," she said. "Miguel. He was 17 when he dove into a lake without checking the depth. The water was only 4 feet deep. He broke his neck." Jonathan closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." He survived. Quadriplegic. Couldn't move anything below his shoulders. Elena's voice remained steady, but Jonathan could hear the effort it cost her. "I was 15. I watched our family fall apart trying to cope. My parents couldn't handle it. They were immigrants, working 3 jobs between them. And suddenly they had a son who needed 24-hour care. The strain destroyed their marriage. What happened to Miguel? I took care of him. From 15 until I was 23, I was his primary caregiver. I learned everything: physical therapy, occupational therapy, how to manage medications and prevent bed sores and recognize the early signs of infection. I learned how to talk to him on the bad days when he wanted to die. I learned how to celebrate the good days when he remembered that life could still hold meaning. Where is he now?" Elena smiled, and for the first time, Jonathan saw the weight of history in her eyes. "He runs a non-profit in San Juan, advocates for disability rights, helps families navigate the healthcare system, mentors young people who are newly injured. He's married, has 2 kids. He's one of the happiest people I know. Because of you. Because of him. I just helped him see what was already there." Jonathan absorbed this, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the extraordinary story she had just shared. "Is that why you asked about music? During your interview?" Music was Miguel's salvation. He couldn't move his body, but he could still feel rhythm, could still respond to melody and harmony. "I used to play guitar for him, and he would direct me, telling me when to speed up or slow down, when to play louder or softer. It was the one area where he had complete control." "And you thought it might help Lucas?" "I hoped it might. Every person is different. But music is a way of being in your body that doesn't depend on walking or running or any particular physical ability. It's movement of a different kind." Jonathan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Lucas used to play, where Catherine used to plant flowers each spring. The beds were overgrown now, choked with weeds. He hadn't had the heart to hire a gardener. "I owe you an apology," he said without turning around, "for watching you without your knowledge, for treating you like a suspect instead of a person. You were protecting your son. I was avoiding him." Jonathan heard his own voice crack and didn't try to hide it. "I've been avoiding him since the accident, using work as an excuse, hiring people to do the job I should be doing myself. I convinced myself that providing for him financially was enough. that making sure he had the best care was the same as being his father. It's not too late. Jonathan turned. Elena was watching him with those calm, intelligent eyes, offering no judgment, only the simple statement of fact. "He's 12, she said. "He needs his father. Not perfect, not always there, just present when he can be. Honest about when he can't. I don't know how to talk to him. Every time I try, I see Catherine in his face, and I just—" Jonathan stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Then start there. Tell him you see her too. Tell him you miss her. Tell him you're scared and sad and don't know how to do this without her." Elena stood, gathering her cardigan around herself. "Lucas doesn't need you to be strong. He needs you to be real." She left the study quietly, leaving Jonathan alone with his thoughts and the morning light filtering through the window. That evening, for the first time in months, Jonathan didn't retreat to his study after dinner. He found Lucas in the living room, working on a puzzle Elena had brought him, a complicated 1,000-piece image of a mountain landscape. "Mind if I join you?" Lucas looked up, surprised. His father never joined him for anything. "Sure, I guess." Jonathan pulled a chair closer to the table and studied the scattered puzzle pieces. "I used to do these with your mom. She was terrible at them. Always tried to force pieces together that didn't fit." A ghost of a smile crossed Lucas's face. "Yeah. She said puzzles were for people with too much patience. She said that about anything that took longer than 5 minutes." Jonathan picked up a piece, examining its shape. "I miss her." The words hung in the air between them. Jonathan had never said them aloud, not to Lucas, not to anyone. He had attended Catherine's funeral in a state of shock, had sorted through her belongings with mechanical efficiency, had erased her presence from the house piece by piece because seeing her things hurt too much. "Me too," Lucas said quietly. "Sometimes I forget what her voice sounds like, and then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again." Jonathan set down the puzzle piece. "I have videos, on my phone, from before. I could show you if you want." Lucas's eyes widened. "You do?" "Hundreds of them. I've been afraid to watch them. But maybe—" Jonathan paused, gathering courage. "Maybe we could watch them together." They didn't finish the puzzle that night. Instead, they sat side by side on the couch, Jonathan's phone propped on a pillow, watching videos of birthday parties and beach vacations and ordinary afternoons. Catherine laughing at her own jokes. Catherine teaching Lucas to ride a bike. Catherine dancing in the kitchen to music only she could hear. Lucas cried. Jonathan cried too. And somewhere in the middle of the tears, something shifted between them. A door that had been closed for 3 years opened a crack. Elena found them there later, both asleep on the couch, the phone dark on the cushion between them. She covered them with a blanket and turned off the lights, smiling to herself as she climbed the stairs to her room. The weeks that followed brought slow, incremental change. Jonathan began working from home more often, setting up a desk in the corner of the library where Lucas did his lessons. He wasn't always available, still took calls and attended meetings, but his presence in the house was no longer an exception. He and Lucas established rituals: puzzle nights on Mondays, video watching on Wednesdays, Saturday mornings at the accessible park across town, where Lucas could navigate the wheelchair-friendly trails while Jonathan walked beside him. They started talking. Not about everything, not easily, but talking. About Catherine. About the accident. About Lucas's fears for the future and Jonathan's struggles with the past. Elena remained a steady presence through it all, neither inserting herself into the growing bond between father and son, nor withdrawing entirely. She adjusted her role subtly, focusing less on filling the gaps in Lucas's life and more on supporting his growing independence. And Jonathan found himself watching her, not through cameras anymore, but directly, with his own eyes. He noticed things he hadn't bothered to notice before. The way she hummed while cooking, melodies he didn't recognize but found oddly soothing. The way she paused at windows, looking out at the garden with an expression that might have been longing. The way she laughed at Lucas's jokes, genuine and warm, crinkling the corners of her eyes. He noticed that she was beautiful. Not in the obvious, polished way of the women who circulated through his business world, but in a quieter way. A way that revealed itself slowly, like a photograph developing in solution. He noticed that he looked forward to seeing her each morning, that her voice had become familiar, comforting, an expected part of his daily rhythm. He noticed, with something approaching alarm, that he was developing feelings for the woman he had hired to care for his son. The realization came upon him gradually, and then all at once, during a December evening when the first snow of the season was falling outside. Lucas had gone to bed early, tired from a productive physical therapy session, and Jonathan found himself alone in the kitchen with Elena. She was making tea, a ritual she performed each night before retiring to her room. He had watched her do it dozens of times, always from a distance. Tonight, for reasons he couldn't explain, he had followed her into the kitchen. "Would you like some?" she asked without turning around. "Please." She poured 2 cups and handed him one, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Jonathan felt the contact like an electric current, surprising and unsettling. They stood in silence, watching the snow accumulate on the windowsill. "You've done something remarkable," Jonathan said finally. "With Lucas, with this whole house. I don't think I've ever properly thanked you. You thank me every 2 weeks. It's called a paycheck." He smiled despite himself. "That's not what I mean." Elena turned to face him, cradling her teacup in both hands. "I know what you mean, and you're welcome. But the real work has been yours, and Lucas's. I'm just... Don't say you're just the help, please." Something flickered in her expression, there and gone. "I was going to say I'm just the witness. I watch people find their way to each other. It's what I do. And then you leave. Eventually. Yes." Jonathan set down his teacup. "What if I didn't want you to leave?" The question surprised them both. Jonathan hadn't planned to say it, hadn't even consciously thought it. But there it was, hanging in the air between them, impossible to take back. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "I'm your employee, Mr. Hale." "Jonathan, please, after everything, I think you can call me Jonathan." "Jonathan." She tested the name, and he felt unreasonably pleased to hear it in her voice. "What exactly are you asking?" He didn't know. That was the honest answer. He hadn't thought this through, hadn't prepared arguments or considered consequences. He only knew that the thought of Elena leaving, of returning to an agency pool and accepting another assignment, filled him with a dread he couldn't rationalize away. "I'm asking if you would consider staying," he said. "Not as Lucas's caregiver, as something else." "As what?" "I don't know yet. As someone who belongs here, as someone who's part of this family, not just employed by it." Elena set down her own cup. Her expression was unreadable. "You're grieving. You're lonely. Those are normal feelings for a man in your situation. They don't mean what you think they mean." "Maybe you're right." Jonathan took a step closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Or maybe I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. You came into this house and everything changed. Not just for Lucas. For me." "Jonathan, I'm not asking for anything tonight. I'm not asking for promises or commitments or declarations. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that this isn't about grief or loneliness, that this is about you, who you are, what you've brought into our lives." Elena's breath caught. Jonathan could see the conflict in her face, the professional boundaries she had maintained so carefully, the personal history that made her cautious. "I need time," she said finally. to think about what you're saying. Take all the time you need." She picked up her tea and walked past him toward the stairs, pausing at the doorway to look back. "For what it's worth," she said, "I've been watching you too. These past months. I've seen you change, grow, become the father Lucas needs. It's been—" She hesitated, searching for words. "It's been remarkable to witness." Then she was gone, her footsteps soft on the staircase, leaving Jonathan alone in the kitchen with his cold tea and his racing heart. The days that followed were charged with a new awareness. Nothing outwardly changed. Elena continued her routines, caring for Lucas, maintaining the household, occupying her established place in their daily rhythm. But there was a new dimension to every interaction, a weight to every glance, a significance to every ordinary exchange. Jonathan found himself performing his life for her, aware of her presence in a way he had never been aware of anyone's presence before. He caught himself straightening his clothes before coming downstairs, rehearsing things to say, looking for opportunities to be in the same room. Elena, for her part, revealed nothing. She was as calm and professional as ever, as warm with Lucas and as competent in her duties. If Jonathan's declaration had affected her, she hid it well. But there were moments. Small moments that might have meant nothing, or might have meant everything. Her hand lingering on his when she passed him a coffee cup. Her eyes meeting his across the room and holding a beat too long. A smile that seemed meant for him alone. Or perhaps he was imagining things. Perhaps she was simply a kind woman being polite to her employer. Perhaps his confession had embarrassed her, and she was counting the days until she could gracefully resign. The uncertainty was torture. Jonathan, who had built a career on calculated risks and confident decisions, found himself paralyzed by doubt. It was Lucas who finally forced the issue. "You like her," he said one evening, during their Wednesday video session. Catherine's face was frozen on the phone screen, caught mid-laugh at something Lucas had said years ago. Jonathan blinked. "What?" "Elena, you like her. Like her." "Lucas, that's not—" "Dad, come on. I'm 12, not stupid. You look at her the way you used to look at Mom." Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face. "I don't think that's appropriate to discuss." "Why not? Mom's gone. Elena's here. You're allowed to be happy again." Lucas paused, considering. "I mean, as long as she wants to be happy with you too. I don't know how she feels about it. Have you asked her?" "Lucas, because you should. Ask her, I mean. She's really nice, and she makes good spaghetti, and she doesn't treat me like I'm broken. Those are all good qualities in a person." Jonathan stared at his son. This child who had been through more in 12 years than most people experienced in a lifetime. 3 years ago, Lucas would have been horrified at the suggestion that his father might be interested in another woman. Now he was offering romantic advice with the casual wisdom of someone twice his age. "When did you grow up?" Jonathan asked. Lucas shrugged. "I've been growing up. You just weren't around to notice." The words stung, but Jonathan recognized them as truth rather than accusation. "I'm sorry. For not being around. For all of it." "I know. It's okay. We're figuring it out." Lucas turned off the phone screen, letting Catherine's frozen smile fade to black. "But you should talk to Elena, for real. She's not going to stay forever, you know. Her last client, the guy with the brain injury, he told me she left as soon as he didn't need her anymore. That's what she does." "How do you know about her last client?" "We talk, Elena and me, about lots of stuff." Lucas wheeled himself toward the door, then paused. "I don't want her to leave, Dad. And I don't think she wants to go. But someone has to give her a reason to stay." He rolled out of the room, leaving Jonathan alone with the ghost of his wife and the challenge laid before him. That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He paced his bedroom, rehearsing conversations, imagining scenarios, talking himself into and out of action a dozen times. By 3 a.m, he had made a decision. He pulled on a robe and padded downstairs to Elena's door. The light was on beneath it. He knocked. Silence. Then her voice, muffled through the wood. "Jonathan." "Yes. Can we talk?" Another pause. Then the sound of movement and the door opened. Elena was wearing pajamas and a cardigan, her hair loose around her shoulders. Without makeup or professional composure, she looked younger, more vulnerable, more real. "It's 3 a.m, she observed. "I know. I'm sorry. I couldn't wait anymore." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside to let him enter. Her room was simpler than he expected. The furniture was elegant, as befitted a room in his house, but she had added almost nothing personal. A few books on the nightstand, a photograph on the dresser, her worn leather bag hanging from a hook. "You travel light," Jonathan observed. "I've learned not to accumulate things I can't carry. Because you're always leaving. Because homes aren't made of objects." Elena sat on the edge of her bed, folding her hands in her lap. "You didn't come here at 3 a.m. to discuss my decorating philosophy." "No." Jonathan sat in the chair by the window, putting distance between them. "I came to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly, even if the answer is no." "Ask. Do you have any feelings for me? Beyond professional obligation? Beyond kindness to your employer?" Elena was silent for so long that Jonathan began to prepare himself for rejection. He had misread everything. The moments he thought were significant were just figments of his imagination. She was being polite, nothing more. Then she said, "Yes." Jonathan's breath stopped. "Yes," she repeated softer now. "I have feelings for you. I've been fighting them for weeks, telling myself they're inappropriate, that I'm confusing my role here with something more, that I should leave before I do something that compromises my professional integrity." "Why haven't you left?" "Because of Lucas. Because I made him a promise. Because..." She looked down at her folded hands. "Because the thought of walking away from this house makes me feel like I'm leaving something essential behind. Something I didn't know I was looking for." Jonathan moved from the chair to sit beside her on the bed, leaving a careful space between them. "What are you looking for?" "I don't know anymore. I used to know. I had a purpose, a mission. Help people like Miguel. Give them what I gave him. Move on when the work is done." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "But this feels different. You feel different. I watch you with Lucas, and I see a man becoming himself, not performing competence, not hiding behind money and control, actually becoming. That's because of you. No, it's because of you. I was just..." She smiled faintly. "I was just the witness. Remember?" Jonathan reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "What if you were more than a witness?" he asked. "What if you were a participant? What if this was your home, not your assignment? What if Lucas was your family, not your client? What about you? What about me? What would you be in this scenario where I stay and become part of your family?" Jonathan tightened his grip on her hand. "I would be the man who loves you, if you'll let me." Elena's eyes glistened. "You don't know me. Not really. You know the version of me that cleans your house and cares for your son. You don't know my flaws, my fears, my bad habits. Then let me learn them. Let me know you, not as an employee, as Elena. Just Elena." "Jonathan, this is..." She shook her head. "This is fast. We barely know each other. I know you sat on my floor and taught my son to make rhythms with spoons. I know you told him the truth when everyone else was feeding him false hope. I know you carried him through exercises when the therapist had gone home. I know you make him laugh. I know you make me feel hope for the first time since Catherine died. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. I know enough to know I want to know more. Elena's resistance crumbled visibly. Her shoulders dropped. Her breath caught. The professional composure she maintained so carefully dissolved into something raw and open. I'm scared, she admitted. I've never stayed anywhere before. Not since Miguel. Not since I became the person who helps and then leaves. I don't know how to be the person who stays. Learn with me. We're both figuring out how to be new people. Why not figure it out together? She laughed, a shaky sound that was half sob. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. Nothing about this is simple. But it might be worth it. I think it might be worth everything. Elena lifted her free hand to his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Jonathan closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. Ask me again, she said. Ask you what? What you asked me in the kitchen, that night with the snow. Jonathan opened his eyes. Will you stay? Yes. The word hung between them, enormous and transformative. Jonathan felt something unlock in his chest. A door he hadn't known was closed, opening onto a landscape he had never dared imagine. He kissed her then, gently, questioningly. She kissed him back with an urgency that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, her forehead rested against his. Lucas will be thrilled, she murmured. Lucas already knows. He's been giving me dating advice. Of course he has. That child is too observant for his own good. They stayed like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, hands clasped, breathing each other's air. Outside the window, the first gray light of dawn began to color the sky. What happens now? Elena asked. Now we figure it out. Together. One day at a time. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better, something more real. It was a beginning. The months that followed were not always easy. Relationships built on unconventional foundations rarely are. There were awkward moments as Elena's role in the household shifted from employee to partner. There were conversations with Jonathan's family and business associates, some supportive, some skeptical. There were adjustments to the daily rhythm of their lives, as three separate people learned to function as a unit. But there was also joy. There was laughter in the kitchen and movie nights on the couch. There were family dinners where Lucas told jokes and Elena rolled her eyes and Jonathan felt his face ache from smiling. There was partnership and compromise in the daily work of building a life together. Lucas flourished. With both his father and Elena present and committed, he began to emerge from the protective shell he had built after the accident. He returned to piano, his mother's instrument, and discovered that his hands still remembered what his legs had forgotten. He started physical therapy with renewed determination, not because he expected to walk again, but because he wanted to be as strong and capable as his changed body would allow. Jonathan stepped back from work, delegating more, trusting his team to handle what he had once insisted on controlling himself. He spent more time at home, more time with Lucas, more time being present instead of merely providing. The cameras still fed into his office server, but he rarely watched them anymore. He didn't need to. He was there. And Elena, who had spent her adult life moving from assignment to assignment, helping others and then moving on, learned what it meant to stay. She learned that home was not a place you could carry in a worn leather bag. Home was something you built, day by day, with people who chose to build it with you. Spring arrived early that year. The garden that had lain dormant since Catherine's death began to show signs of life. Crocuses and daffodils pushing through the thawing earth. Jonathan found Elena there one afternoon, kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds. "What are you doing?" "Getting ready to plant." She looked up at him, soil on her cheek, happiness in her eyes. Catherine's flower beds deserve to bloom again. Jonathan knelt beside her, heedless of his expensive trousers. You never met Catherine. I know, but I know her through you, through Lucas, through the videos and the stories and the love you still carry for her. Elena touched his face, leaving a smudge of dirt on his jaw. She gave you Lucas. She made you the man you are. The least I can do is honor her memory. She would have liked you. You think so? I know so. She always said I was too controlled, too afraid to let people in. She would have loved that you taught me how to feel again. Elena kissed him, soft and sweet, tasting of spring and possibility. Help me plant? She asked. I don't know anything about gardening. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. They spent the afternoon in the dirt, planting seeds and bulbs, learning as they went. Lucas joined them eventually, wheeling out onto the accessible path Jonathan had installed years ago, but rarely used. He couldn't kneel, but he could reach the raised beds Elena positioned beside his chair. The three of them worked until sunset, dirty and laughing and utterly, completely happy. That night, after Lucas was in bed and the house was quiet, Jonathan found Elena in the living room, looking at a new photograph she had placed on the mantel. It showed the three of them in the garden, captured by the timer on Jonathan's phone. Lucas was grinning, dirt on his chin. Elena was laughing at something off camera. Jonathan was looking at her with an expression of unguarded love. Beside it, she had placed an older photograph. Catherine, holding newborn Lucas, smiling at the camera with exhausted joy. I hope you don't mind, Elena said. I thought they should be together, past and present, the family Lucas comes from, and the family he has now. Jonathan wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her against his chest. I don't mind, he said. It's perfect. They stood together, looking at the photographs, at the evidence of their blended, imperfect, beautiful family. I love you, Jonathan said. The words came easily now, after months of practice. I love who you are. I love who I am when I'm with you. I love the life we're building. Elena turned in his arms to face him. I love you too, she said. I love this house. I love our son. I love that you saw me, really saw me when I thought I was invisible. I love that you asked me to stay. Will you keep staying? For as long as you'll have me. How about forever? Elena smiled, that rare, radiant smile that transformed her face from ordinary to luminous. Forever sounds about right. Outside, the moon rose over Greenwich, silvering the newly planted garden and the sprawling colonial mansion, and the three people inside who had found their way to each other against all odds. Jonathan Hale had built his fortune on foresight, control, and preparation. But the greatest gift of his life had come from none of those things. It had come from a quiet woman who asked about music during a job interview, who sat on floors making rhythms with spoons, who spoke truth when everyone else offered comfort. It had come from learning to let go of control, to trust someone else with his vulnerable son and his wounded heart. It had come from love. In the end, it always came from love. The cameras were still there, tiny and silent, embedded in corners and lamps and shelves, but they no longer recorded fear or surveillance, or the desperate need for control. Now, if anyone had thought to check them, they would have captured something different. A family, imperfect and healing. Changed, but not broken. Together.